The sun had barely risen over the ridges when Malik Johnson stepped out onto his porch with a mug of steaming coffee. The dew still clung to the tall grass, glistening in the morning light, and his cattle lowed softly in the distance. From where he stood, Malik could see the red barn his grandfather had built nearly 80 years ago. Its wooden beams, though weathered, stood strong and proud. For Malik, it wasn't just a barn. It was the heart of the land, a legacy of blood, sweat, and determination. He often thought about his grandfather, a man who had tilled these fields long before the luxury homes of the HOA sprouted across the ridge. Back then, this valley was all farmland and wilderness. His grandfather had raised the barn by hand, plank by plank, with neighbors helping one another in the spirit of community. Malik had restored it with his own hands years later, patching the roof, reinforcing the beams, and painting the wood a fresh shade of barn red. It sheltered his cattle in storms, stored his tools, and stood as a symbol of the Johnson family's perseverance. That's why Malik's chest tightened with dread when he heard the rumble of heavy engines approaching. He set his mug down on the porch rail, squinting toward the dirt road that led into his property. Dust clouds rose into the air as bulldozers and flatbeds rolled closer. "What the hell?" Malik muttered, already pulling his phone from his pocket. His dogs barked and sprinted along the fence line as men in reflective vests hopped down from trucks. A white SUV pulled up last, polished and gleaming against the dirt. From it stepped Richard Whitmore, the HOA president. Richard adjusted his sunglasses, surveying Malik's property with disdain. Malik strode toward them, fists clenched. "What's going on here?" he demanded. A stocky foreman with a clipboard barely looked up. "Demolition order, sir. Non-compliant structure. We'll have it down by noon." Malik's heart pounded. "Non-compliant? This barn isn't even under your HOA. My land has nothing to do with your little subdivision." The foreman smirked, waving a sheaf of papers. "According to the board, this structure violates community aesthetics. Got full approval. Best step back." "Community aesthetics?" Malik barked out a bitter laugh. "This barn's been here longer than your entire subdivision. You can't touch it." Whitmore finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mr. Johnson, your barn is visible from the lakefront properties. Our residents pay for a certain standard of view. That old shack lowers property values." The board voted unanimously. Before Malik could respond, the bulldozers roared to life. He shouted over the noise, "You set foot on my land with that machine, and I'll have you arrested." He dialed the sheriff's office, but the dispatcher's bored voice only promised someone would check in soon. The machines advanced. Malik stood in front of the barn doors, arms spread wide. "This is private property. You don't touch a damn thing." The foreman glanced at Whitmore, who gave a slight nod. Two men approached Malik, not quite shoving but crowding him until he was forced back. The bulldozer's steel blade pressed against the barn's weathered boards. With a sickening crack, the wall gave way. Malik's stomach lurched as timber splintered and beams toppled. The barn groaned like a dying giant. Dust rose in thick clouds as the machine plowed forward, tearing apart decades of history in minutes. Tools, hay bales, and feed spilled across the ground as if gutted. From the ridge, neighbors gathered, some filming on their phones, others watching with smug satisfaction. Malik caught sight of a young woman sipping coffee on her porch, smirking as though the destruction were morning entertainment. Whitmore leaned against his SUV, muttering to another board member, "Finally. That eyesore's gone." Malik felt his throat tighten, fury and helplessness burning in his chest. He thought of his grandfather's calloused hands driving nails into those boards. He thought of the nights he'd spent patching the roof in the rain, determined to keep the structure alive. Now it was rubble, torn down not by nature or time, but by arrogance. By the time the sheriff finally rolled up, lights flashing lazily, the barn was a heap of shattered wood and twisted metal. Malik stormed toward him. "You're going to arrest them, right? They had no right. This is my land." The sheriff gave a long sigh, scratching his chin. "They got paperwork from the county, Malik. Says here it's authorized. Authorized by lies." Malik shouted, his voice breaking. "That was my family's barn. I'm sorry," the sheriff said, though his tone was anything but. "Not much I can do now." The trucks packed up, engines fading into the distance. The subdivision crowd dispersed, laughing and chatting as though they'd just left a barbecue. Malik stood alone before the ruins, the silence pressing heavy around him. He sank onto the ground, running his hands through the dirt, touching the splinters of what remained. That night, Malik didn't sleep. He sat by the ruins under the wide, star-filled sky, listening to the restless cattle. His grandfather's voice echoed in memory. They'll try to strip you of what's yours, but don't let them take your dignity, boy. His gaze turned toward the valley. The moonlight shimmered across the surface of the HOA's pride and joy, the man-made lake, centerpiece of their resort community. Tourists came from all over to fish, sail, and vacation there. Homeowners boasted about their private waterfront paradise. What none of them realized was that the lake depended on a steel valve sitting quietly at the far end of Malik's property. A valve his grandfather had insisted remain under Johnson control when the dam was built. And Malik knew then. The HOA had started a war. The ruins of the barn sat like a fresh wound in the heart of Malik's property. The smell of splintered pine and upturned earth lingered long after the bulldozers left. Malik hadn't slept, not a wink. He'd sat in the dark with a lantern, staring at the pile of broken timber and twisted nails, replaying every sound of destruction in his mind, the crunch of beams, the sneers of the HOA men, the way Whitmore smirked as though he'd erased a problem instead of history. By morning, Malik's eyes were bloodshot, but his back was straight. He walked among the ruins with slow steps, bending to pick up a fragment of wood. It was part of a support beam, rough and scarred, but he recognized the notch his grandfather had carved to fit it into place. Malik's fingers traced it like a sacred relic. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice. Son, this land don't belong to them. It don't belong to me. It belongs to all who'll come after us. Your job is to guard it. The words echoed in his chest, heavier now than ever. Later that morning, Malik drove into town. News of the demolition had already spread. At the diner, whispers followed him as he entered. Some people nodded respectfully, others avoided his eyes. A few shook their heads, muttering, "Don't mess with the HOA. They'll bleed you dry in court." Miss Ruth, the waitress who'd known Malik since he was a boy, set down a mug of coffee in front of him. Her voice was low, firm. "What they did was wrong. Everybody knows it, but you be careful, baby. Those people got money, lawyers, connections. They'll crush you if you come at them the wrong way." Malik sipped the bitter coffee, staring out the diner window. "They already crushed me," he said. Quietly. A couple of local farmers slid into the booth across from him. One of them, old Tom Barker, leaned forward. "Malik, we all saw what happened. Ain't no man should lose what's his that way. But you go swinging back, the law's on their side. We can't fight money." "I'm not looking to fight with fists or lawyers," Malik replied. "I just want them to remember this land ain't theirs to own." They forgot that. The men exchanged wary glances. They knew the fire in Malik's voice. They also knew he had something the HOA didn't, a kind of leverage no court could take away. On the drive back home, Malik pulled his truck onto the gravel road that led to the dam. The lake stretched wide and glittering before him, its surface rippling in the summer breeze. On the far side, the HOA's $1 million home stood proud, their docks reaching into the water like greedy fingers. A couple of speedboats cut across the surface, their engines whining, while children laughed from the shore. Malik parked and walked to the edge of the dam. The valve sat housed in a squat concrete block, secured with an old but sturdy lock. His grandfather had been adamant about keeping control of it, refusing to sell that piece of land when the county partnered with developers decades ago. Back then, people had laughed at his stubbornness. Now, Malik understood. He crouched before the valve, running a hand across the steel wheel. It was cold and rough beneath his palm, a symbol of power that no HOA decree could touch. He imagined what would happen if he turned it. The lake would drain slowly at first, a trickle becoming a torrent, until all their boats sat crooked in the mud and their lakefront paradise became a wasteland. The thought brought a grim smile to his lips, but he pushed it back. He couldn't act out of blind rage. That was what they expected of him. If he moved, it had to be deliberate, undeniable, and righteous. That evening, Malik invited a few trusted friends over. They sat on his porch as the sun set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. His neighbor Clara, a schoolteacher, looked at him with worried eyes. "You're thinking about doing something, aren't you?" Malik didn't deny it. "They took from me, not just a building, but a legacy. My grandfather fought to keep this land. They think I'm powerless, but I hold something they need more than I do." Clara bit her lip. "If you open that valve, it won't just hurt them. It'll make headlines. The whole county will come down on you." "Let them," Malik said, his voice calm, steady. "All I want is for them to understand what it means to take what isn't theirs. You drain a man's soul, you best be ready to watch your own wealth wash away." Silence hung in the air. The cicadas hummed in the trees, and the lake shimmered in the distance like a jewel waiting to be broken. Malik leaned back in his chair, his decision hardening inside him like stone. His grandfather had once told him, respect ain't given, it's demanded when the world forgets who you are. And now, Malik knew exactly how to demand it. The dawn broke quietly, streaking the valley with pale gold light. Malik had been awake long before the sun rose, pacing his porch with heavy boots and heavier thoughts. The ruins of his barn stood in shadow behind him, but his eyes were fixed on the glimmering lake across the way. Every ripple on its surface mocked him, a mirror of the HOA's arrogance. By 6 o'clock, he'd made up his mind. He took the long walk down the gravel path to the dam, each step crunching like the ticking of a clock. The air was cool, but sweat dampened the back of his shirt. He wasn't nervous, at least not in the way they expected him to be. He was resolved. His grandfather's words echoed in his chest like a heartbeat. Guard what's yours. The valve housing came into view, a squat block of concrete nestled against the dam's spine. The wheel itself was iron, thick and solid, painted years ago but now flaking rust red. Malik pulled a key from his pocket, one that had been passed down with the land. The padlock clinked open with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for this very morning. He stood still for a moment, staring at the wheel. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to happen. He imagined his grandfather's calloused grip on the same wheel decades ago, adjusting the flow of water when the county first filled the reservoir. Time to remind them who holds the line, Malik whispered. He set both hands on the wheel and began to turn. The iron groaned in protest, stiff from years of disuse. Malik gritted his teeth, muscles straining as the wheel inched forward. The sound of grinding metal echoed across the dam like a warning. Then came the rush, a low, rumbling growl as water began to surge through unseen channels. The lake shifted, rippling unnaturally, like a giant disturbed in its sleep. At first, nothing looked different. The water still glittered, the boats still bobbed. But as Malik leaned on the railing, he saw it. The faintest lowering of the shoreline, a line of wet earth revealing itself where there had only been water moments before. He stood there watching as the trickle became a current, the current became a stream. The lake began to bleed away, slow but steady. By late morning, the first signs of panic appeared. Families on their boats shouted in confusion as their vessels tilted awkwardly in the shallows. Docked pontoon boats screeched as their undersides scraped the receding waterline. Children screamed when their swimming areas turned into muddy stretches. From the lakefront homes, residents poured out in disbelief. A man shouted into his phone, pacing wildly. Another yelled at his wife to call the HOA, now. Their paradise, the gem they flaunted at every barbecue and gathering, was shrinking before their very eyes. Whitmore was one of the first to arrive. His pristine SUV screeched to a halt near the dam, gravel scattering. He stormed toward Malik, face red, finger stabbing the air. What the hell do you think you're doing, Johnson? He barked. Malik didn't flinch. He stood tall beside the wheel, arms folded across his chest. Just taking back what was mine. You demolished my barn. This lake, he gestured toward the dropping water, doesn't exist without me. You can't. This is vandalism. This is destruction of community property. Whitmore spat, veins bulging in his neck. Community property. Malik shot back. Funny, I don't remember being part of your community when you sent your machines onto my land. This valve sits on my property. Always has. I can open it or close it whenever I see fit. Whitmore faltered, rage twisting into unease. Around him, other HOA board members arrived, shouting threats and demands. But Malik's calm presence silenced them more than his words. He wasn't yelling, wasn't frantic. He was steady as the water rushing beneath their feet. By noon, the lake had receded dramatically. Boats lay stranded in the muck. Fish flopped helplessly in shallow pools. The docks tilted at crooked angles like broken teeth. What had once been a sparkling jewel of the subdivision was now a barren crater of mud and stone. Residents screamed at each other. Some cursed Malik openly, others demanded Whitmore fix this mess. But Whitmore could do nothing. No paperwork, no lawyer, no county official could force the water back. Malik walked past him slowly, his boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. He stopped only once, turning back to look Whitmore in the eye. His voice was low, even, carrying across the stunned silence of the crowd. You took my family's legacy like it was nothing. Now I've shown you how it feels when what you value most is taken. Next time, think twice before you destroy what isn't yours. With that, Malik left them standing on the cracked edge of their ruined dream, the drained lake a mirror of their arrogance. The once pristine lake was nothing but a scar across the valley now. Where glistening waters had shimmered beneath the summer sun, there stretched a wide, muddy crater. Boat docks jutted uselessly into empty air, pontoons and speedboats sat abandoned in the muck, and the smell of stagnant fish rose with every hot breeze. For the HOA, it was a catastrophe. Property values plummeted almost overnight. Tourists who had booked lakefront vacations demanded refunds. The resort golf course, once boasting majestic water views, now looked out over cracked earth and swarms of mosquitoes. The jewel of the subdivision had turned into its greatest embarrassment. The HOA board scrambled. They called emergency meetings, hired lawyers, and stormed into county offices demanding action. Whitmore led the charge, furious and desperate. That man drained our lake. He destroyed community property. He should be in jail. But the county clerk, flipping through thick binders of land deeds, shook her head. The dam valve and its housing are entirely on Johnson property. His family never relinquished rights when the reservoir was constructed. Legally, he's within his authority to control it. Whitmore's face had gone purple. You're saying he can just drain the lake whenever he wants? That's exactly what I'm saying, the clerk replied flatly. The news spread like wildfire. Local outlets ran the story under headlines like, HOA pushes farmer too far, pays the price, and, man drains lake after HOA destroys barn. National networks soon picked it up, portraying Malik as a modern-day folk hero standing against greed and abuse of power. Reporters camped at the edge of his property, eager for quotes. When asked why he had done it, Malik stood tall before the cameras. My barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was my family's history. They took it without thought, without respect. That lake, it only exists because my grandfather allowed it. They forgot that. I reminded them. The clip went viral. Comment sections flooded with praise. People who had been bullied by HOAs in other parts of the country cheered him on, calling him the man who drained the HOA. Supporters mailed him letters, donations, even offers to help rebuild what had been lost. Meanwhile, the HOA launched lawsuits. They claimed Malik had endangered wildlife, disrupted tourism, and inflicted emotional distress on residents. Malik's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Valerie, shredded their arguments in court. She held up the original deed, pointing to the clause granting the Johnson family full rights to the dam valve. Ladies and gentlemen, she told the judge, my client did not trespass, did not steal, did not destroy. He simply exercised rights that have always belonged to his family. If the HOA is distressed, it is only because they never respected the man whose land made their paradise possible. The judge ruled in Malik's favor. The HOA's lawsuits crumbled like sand. Whitmore and his board tried to save face, but the community turned on them. Angry homeowners, furious that their investments had sunk along with the lake, demanded resignations. Several board members quit under pressure, and Whitmore himself was forced to step down. Back on his land, Malik began rebuilding. This time, he didn't work alone. Volunteers from neighboring towns came to help, hammering and sawing beside him. Old Tom brought his tractor. Miss Ruth sent meals every day for the workers. Even people who had once stood silently while the barn fell came forward, ashamed and eager to make amends. Piece by piece, the new barn rose higher and stronger than the one before. Malik chose heavy oak beams and reinforced steel brackets. He painted it the same proud red, but added his own mark, his grandfather's initials carved into the main support beam, preserved under clear varnish. On the day the barn was finished, Malik stood before it as the sun set, casting long golden rays across the valley. Children ran through the field, neighbors laughed and clapped, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. For the first time since the demolition, Malik felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He walked to the dam one last time that evening. The valve sat silent, locked once more. He placed a hand on it and whispered, "Not today." The lakebed behind it remained barren, a cracked reminder of what had been lost and taken for granted. Some locals asked if he'd ever refill it. Malik's answer was always the same, maybe one day. When respect is rebuilt like my barn was. Until then, it stays dry. And so the HOA's Grand Lake became a monument to arrogance, a warning carved into the land itself. Tourists stopped coming, and the once boastful homeowners now looked out their windows at mud and weeds. Meanwhile, Malik's barn stood proud, a beacon of endurance. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about legacy. And as Malik watched the sunset blaze across his fields, he knew one thing for certain: they would never underestimate him again.